Tashidele Rinpoche.
Tashidele Shalom.
Shalom, our deepest gratitude to you, Jhado Tulku Rinpoche, for accepting Dharma Friends of Israel request and kindly offer this precious teaching. Thank you very much, Rinpoche.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.
We'll start with the prayer of taking refuge and generation of Bodhichitta. So, Venerable Carlton, please.
Yeah. Tande de shape Javananye, any junior, and lots of Kamatundula, and Geshe Kasamola, Changi, and that so chenny, and Junang or what the Chejan you to your man also talk. What in the chenny, any counts of Tande. Tapete long Danine, and the road chess and Talana get a shade. What the Talana can be meet Malaya and to Chetashi delicious.
לפני שאנחנו מתחילים עם התפילות, רימוצ'ה קודם כל רוצה לברך את כולנו, ברוכים הבאים לשיעור שאנחנו הולכים לקבל מרימפוצ'ה היום ומחר. הוא רוצה להודות למארגנים, לידידי הדרמה וגם לאוסף המתורגמנים שתרגם את השיעורים של רימפוצ'ה היום ומחר. אז יש איתנו את גשע קריסמואמו ויש אותי ויש גם את צ'ינשן מונגוש. הבקשה ללימודים האלה נעשתה לרימפוצ'ה בשנה שעברה,
So sorry, I was muted. So anyway, Rinpoche just thanked all the translators and thanked for everyone who's organized this event, and also said that this has been planned for 2 years, has been planned since last year. So finally, we've been able to organize it to come together. And today there are going to be 2 hours of teachings, and of those 2 hours, Rinpoche will speak for an hour and a half an hour question and answers. And of course, of this time that we have together, most important is our motivation before we start, being a teaching of the Nalanda tradition, of the universal vehicle. Therefore, it's important that we generate the right kind of motivation. And the right kind of motivation we can generate when we recite the prayer, Refuge and Bodhichitta. So that creates the best circumstance or the best conditions for us to generate a motivation that is most beneficial. Therefore, the means to generate this is this prayer. So let's recite the prayer of Refuge and Bodhichitta. Let's recite it 3 times together and make sure that our motivation is appropriate. There's no need to have more extensive prayers than that. So please join.
I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the
Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. Acclamations of teachings. Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Refuge until I'm enlightened to Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. Conventions of Chinese for everything to without gender. Buddha, benefit all sentient beings. Go for refuge enlightened to the Buddha, the Supreme Assembly.
By the accumulations, I gather through listening to the teachings, might become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings.
dawa mongene tuju chana chi ka je dawa dina le ene tuju chi tengo res je sedi deba nganjun nungo deba le labram minduas kangbe nala internet chalam tuju tata raya ji mindudas en che tu nyene chalam yose kangba ji khaba duwa ngel tse those chi mota tiri ale chalam tata lega le tu bi rawa yes.
So Rinpoche said, well, today we got together here in order to receive these teachings. And it was really difficult to find a date. It was difficult to organize it. So for many months we came together, we discussed when would be the right day or the best date. And not being easy. Well, also where Rinpoche is right now, it's really difficult to find a stable internet connection. Rinpoche is in India and Dharamsala right now. So his internet not being very good in his room, he had to go and find an internet connection that is stable enough. So he actually found a hotel where he's right now, and he's hoping that the connection will last, that there won't be any power cuts, there won't be any disruptions. So it's been a bit of a problem. I mean, it's been a little bit difficult to organize it, but that is just the situation. So Rinpoche says he's praying that everything will work out well, that the internet, etc., will work well. And as to the main topic for today's teachings, well, the teaching is going to be on the Sutra on Dependent Arising.
nyambo khande chi yore thatu goba khande chi yore nega ta thatu nigal je chi ta bongo yu de be ta tinde chi ta do thang sum chi himbare o ti ko ta ma chi shuis.
Now the question is, why was this sutra chosen? What is the reason for choosing this particular sutra as for the topic, as like being the topic for today's teachings, and how important is that particular sutra? What are its benefits, and what is its purpose, its temporary purpose, its final purpose, in terms of, well, it's actually important temporarily, it's important right now, and it's important in the future. So in what way that is the case, all that will be discussed today, so to really understand why this was chosen.
Number Sanjay Chuchi, Nyeshe Chigi Yore, number Sanjay Chuchi, Nyeshe Chiagi, number Sanjay Chutu, Zoti, Tombopoti, Tuba Sange Jumden de, Tuba Sange Jumden de, Tomba Shenle, Kabar to Pabe, Pachu, Zoti, or Chi Usu, Shindu Jago Yore, Sense of Musundu Zani Yore, Pages of Jeju Yore, Seve, Tindegi. Now, you take some money. The Tubasangi Jumden and Jidangi come Dinalaya and Tombormo, Mongoye, Kine, Tomba Shene, Cabar to Pave, Ma Dameber, that the Tubasangi Jumden there, the Kichu Tumo in Bati, Sunguye in Bare, that Tidavati, Ma and Dam Meluti, Carrera Chavina, or Tubasangi Jumden, dangerous Sungdus. Jidengi come Tombo Mambo duty, Tended Rawang Gone, Sung Tunye, and Tubasangi Jumden de Konamato, Tandapato, Rawang Domba, Shana Tuba Maba, Ramdo Gimanduchi, Sungi, Tubasangi Jumden de Naji Reshas, said the number Sanjay when in a young G Nambe Chuzu Dilla, and Tumo Maimbe, Chita, Tavake, Tori in a young, Tendigi. Do or the good Jajati, she had a catching wind.
Yes. Now, this is important. It's important to understand what is important to understand in this context as well. In particular here, when we talk about Buddhism, when we, well, either listen to the Dharma or explain the Dharma, who's the teacher? Well, the main teacher is Buddha Shakyamuni. He's the main teacher who, well, first of all, is endowed with special marks and signs. He's got the 32 major marks and the 80 minor signs of an enlightened being. But that's not all. That's not the only qualities that he has. What it is about him is that, well, he's been described in this world, he's been described as an amazing teacher who's given amazing teachings. Well, what are these amazing teachings that the Buddha has given so that he can be called such an amazing teacher? Well, it's his teaching on dependent arising. Excuse me. So this teaching on dependent arising or dependent origination of all phenomena of the many teachers in this world, and there are many teachers in this world, there's no one who's given that kind of teaching. And furthermore, not only has he taught it, but he's taught it without having to rely on anyone else. It was just an insight that the Buddha himself had gained. And so based on that, he kind of independently, if you like, or on his own accord, he's taught dependent arising. So this is something extremely special. This is an amazing teaching which makes the teacher amazing. And then with regard to or makes the Buddha amazing. And then with regard to the sutra here, well, this is also an uncommon teaching. It's considered to be an uncommon teaching, a teaching independence on which we may generate faith, because it's such an uncommon kind of text that we will go through. So teaching this very topic that the Buddha is so known for, so teaching dependent arising. Therefore, this is what we need to understand in this context here.
That Sankit then the Tumu Dujenangoki, Lugu want to chebe in there. Got the Nangaji to us teaching Chidan Lugu, the Tindiji, Changme Shi Shingre, in a go the Jamjondi, Maranso Hakoyati, Kachambure, contesting the Kachambure, Shubaina, Sankit then the Jebu Sage Tumbare. Jidengi come din nangi pusun chobe kechu da ji nejukoba and ji longju to get la pongba yomare te data tamjela ningo meba sine kimmeba and rabdu chungne luruka jene and ngombazoba sange jeba jayate sange chumden de rangin le chigi and peti Netuchi Rebesna Mandeva, Maranzu, Duje, Chita, Mombalia, Ditabulamia, Love Gobi, Gusen, Dinderetas, to Motu Tsutu, and two Zabachi, Zaban Zabachi Imba. Or ta, Tin Zabatina Karitus Chabina, Gabe Dunge, Nave Dunge, Chive Dunge, Take Dunge de Midua, or ta, Ganechi, or Tendavati, ta, Kandar. Ye debati and coverancy, coverneda, Lenyung Shawan changing, Yinchinjella, Tele Mandevaji, Batik, Tele travel top, Kandichi go do, Goyundu, and Shine G, Kap Tidugi, and Jagapapa Yugi, that Nyamlemba Tadevegi, Jimbu singing Yimbare. Hakju singiji ye imbare o da rimbuta hakju la soba tsuleya and jikjeju jeje tsu kundune danga nyemba nanje o jiame menchi mushi danga nyene tada tamje tugul tum o tene sije mushi nyu danga nyene o dabada jikti tu nyamsu shene sije mushi nyu chombe yende digi tuksu chu ane rangi tuksu chubal tamdu mase tuksu chubal telatene ane o ta digi nyumung ngunju wa rapa chikta jema menchik nyumung ngunju wa rapa chamsi gon nemba chamsi chal shira namjenge lamna tene 용기 연아양 아니 자완네 라미게 초신 체네 봉투고 매버지 쓰이네 덴다베 기겐나바니 들이야 림부싱에다 학주스니 들이야 아니 간드나제 다 뇽웅웅주 원고 좀 마토지기 라미게 초신도 체 서번데 제보 방금 민두와 아니 디마방 코알 저토고 민두 텔레 트래픽 엔 담바드나로나스 제제 슈윤두 군인이게야 다 나라니를 여배연데 디마도메 다 캐랑문에 드니지 보고 여배나 다 캐랑기 랑도 연댕이 토네 29도 주고 보는 건도 제고를 했어 중대 아니 신에 아니 공글로도까지 젠네 아니 다 두스체제 인도 댕이 루타도 제배나 저런 땡지관에 세미지시베 땡도지로 건도 제사지 땡다 스루 창주고 산데타된 지로 무슨 어떤데스는 르주 두스도와스 두조 당문에 전에 나란 솔이야 롭된 첨부지래도 와스.
Now, with regard to the story of the Buddha himself, just the life of the Buddha himself is such a great teaching. And it's important really for us to understand like how, in what way the Buddha's life can actually teach us so much. Of course, you already know that story to some degree, but just to kind of mention some of the facts again. So the Buddha was born in great luxury. He was born as a prince into great wealth. So in terms of enjoyments, in terms of, well, all the riches and wealth that he had access to, well, there was no limit to that. However, he saw that all this luxury, all these goods, all this wealth had no real essence, that it had no meaning. And instead of continuing to enjoy this as this wealthy prince, he chose to leave behind his home. He chose the path of homelessness. He became a renunciate and underwent great austerities until he eventually attained the enlightened state of a Buddha. So in order, not just for his own benefit, but for the benefit of us, for the benefit of us sentient beings. And moreover, actually at that time, attaining enlightenment, well, it is said that he had already reached enlightenment in a previous birth, but he just manifested enlightenment in order for us to show us exactly, to show us how to go about it, how to teach, how to travel the path, journey the path to full enlightenment. And also, well, what he had as a young man before he left his home, he was taught by well, his experience of seeing, for instance, a corpse, an old person, of seeing someone sick. So of these, what he witnessed as birth was not one of the things he witnessed, but he saw that in this world there's the suffering of aging, death, and sickness. And as a result of having witnessed that, of having seen a sick person, an old person, a dead person, etc. So because of that, he decided to leave everything behind and become a renunciate. And initially, well, he looked for a teacher. He wanted to find a person, a teacher who would lead him to a state free from suffering, to be able to overcome all his afflictions and then eventually become enlightened. So, or reach liberation, at least from suffering. And he had these two teachers, these two Indian teachers, who gave him teachings in particular on certain concentrative states, to attain higher awarenesses, higher perceptions, and of course deep states of concentrations, which enabled him to temporarily overcome his afflictive emotions. So without being able to totally eliminate his afflictive emotions, he was able to suppress them through these different states of concentration. However, the Buddha realized at the time as he was practicing with these two teachers, non-Buddhist Indian teachers, he realized that although he was able to suppress his afflictive emotions with these different states of concentration so that temporarily they didn't manifest, he was unable to totally eliminate them with their roots, with their seat, so that they can no longer arise. So understanding that, he approached his two teachers and asked them for a teaching that enabled him to overcome not just temporarily his delusions, his afflictions, such as anger and so forth, but rather to totally eliminate them. And in response to that, they told him, well, we don't have a teaching on that. We don't know how to totally eliminate the delusions, the afflictive emotions. So they told the Buddha, they recommended him they told him, well, go on your own to try to find this path on your own, because there won't be anyone who can teach you the path to that kind of state. And so as a result of that, the Buddha left his two teachers and underwent, well, first the ascetic practices that we all heard about, these ascetic practices for many years, undergoing great hardship, physical and mental hardship, until eventually he realized that that was also not the way to become enlightened. That was not the right kind of means. And instead, he then sat down under the Bodhi tree in order to then become fully enlightened. So such is the story. This is the story of the Buddha, which is a teaching in itself, from leaving his luxurious home all the way to undergoing, leaving his home, then receiving teachings, engaging in ascetic kind of practices, and eventually attain the enlightened state of the Buddha.
האספקטים הגסים של הרמות הנמוכות וההיבטים של השלווה ברמות הגבוהות, אבל הוא לא הגיע למצב שבו הם לעולם לא ייווצרו יותר בעתיד. אז הוא פנה למוריו והוא אמר, אני תרגלתי את הטכניקות האלה, אבל עדיין לא הצלחתי להגיע למצב שבו הם לעולם לא יתרחשו שוב. ומוריו של הבודה אמרו לו שזה מה שאנחנו עשינו, זה מה שאנחנו הצלחנו לעשות, ומעבר לזה אנחנו לא יכולים ללמד אותך טכניקה שבה מצבי התודעה האחרים לעולם לא יתרחשו יותר בעתיד. את זה אתה צריך לעשות בעצמך, אתה צריך לעשות מצדך. וכשהבודה קיבל את ההוראה הזאת ממוריו הרוחניים, אז הוא תרגל לאחר מכן 6 שנים של תרגולים סדפניים, ולאחר מכן, הוא הצליח להגשים את מצב ההערה. הסיפור הזה נמצא באוסף השיעורים של השרווקה, של ההינאיינה, אז השיעורים האלה מאוד מפורטים, ואנחנו יכולים לקבל מהם עוד פרטים אם נבדוק את השיעורים האלה.
땡진도 코랑게 나라 수유 땡진들과 중앙 통화되니 최 통과했어. 수유 최 통화되기 아니 다 산계 통화 순간에 유르가실 근데 여기 유르가실 디신시고 통화스 뭐 근데야 순구도와 딱 간다 디신시고 통화인 순구연에 산계 통화 순간 돈다 밥사 찍을 봐딱 그 찍들라 누가 첨부지도 와 수유 땡진들과 중앙 통화되기 최 통과했어. 지난 누제도 드문지 처음 뭐 쉬우지 여래 지난 누제 저 강가 통화를 땡데 통과 계속 그냥 고추에 개발 왔지 못 듣는 게 여러 봐다 되네 수유처 통화 되네 아니 디신시고 통화사를 최대한 최 개발 왔지 순고 알아 다 와는 디 가르레스인데 다기 에네 림부다 하주니 군드네 에네 세정의시 menchegi ta jigde shiran no bachengi lam o thecham shiki ane bomba chamgi chö thong thu me ji tishi shi go thong thu me to ji ta wana chö khar thong go resna o tenji drawa jung gyunde tende ki ne ti ane dusche thong ba ina ane chö ji ngontu drube chamle ane lende ge namsha o tende ji chö thong o dusche ne go 다음에 따와 실내샵에 토네 에네 랜딩 납작 때문에 주지 토네 저 통수직 수고 여인설에 나라 섬주 된지 팀도 다 되네 수출 통화 되네 있으네 다 다음에 따와 디 에네 통과 될라 때네 에네 용몽배 지 친줄로로 용수 조배기 다 자와티 가르샤스나 당진티 임바레 마리파티 임바레 된라와티 and 무기 념부 체통에 무슨 지단가에 양답에 이시디 가르샤를 했으나 아니 다음에 또베 이시암 돈이 또베 이시암 든지지래 텐다바티 통화티기 아니 림베 에네 담봉은 요거 좀 되네 사변도 잡아 되네 파차다 잡아 아니 디바니 녀몽베 디바도 시제 디바 말루바 용수 좀니 아니 디신시고 통 산제 통신 다 뭔도 제투 그랬으니 든지 체제 순구도와 다 이슈콩도 주셔야 돼 세바다면 제 이슈콩도 주셔야 돼 내주 거야 든지 제대도 와 대인들 디신시바 상계 좀 된데 쉬어야 돼 어떤 배 셴레 캐버도 파베 턱수직 시고구여바 있나 다 연대 대답부 땡지 들어 중에 연대 대답불라 때네 아니 준대 땡지 시베 토네 뭔도 두발 잠베 지 연대 되게디 투수추 다 차실 때베 땡지 당 민ኛ 따여 잠나 때베 땡지 들라 투규를 충베 투 콩도 추베 거네 녀몽보다 대샤베 파자다 잡아 멀루바 용수방베 디신시베 공방승인지 녀야디 딱 동바 코나랑 마도치기 텔레시베 동바시 수장 때문에 대봐 어떤데 인자 디신시바데 마담에바레스 마담에 denjo 샤제 토스니 정말로 정거 치미데 순구여래라 아니 뭐 그런 거 봐봐 루기 마담에 순구도와 어떻게 내가 근데 임나
Now, with regard to the Buddha, therefore, having shown us this path in this amazing way, well, in particular when it comes to this teaching, the teaching that is presented in the sutra that we're studying, so dependent arising, this coming from the Buddha. So this teaching on dependent arising that's given in the sutra, well, that's usually taught. Dependent arising is usually taught in a way in which it is said that whoever sees dependent arising will see the Dharma. Whoever sees the Dharma will see the Tathagata, or will see the Buddha, the different versions of that. But most of the sutras that describe, most of the texts that describe dependent arising say exactly that, maybe in a slightly different way, but it's important that there's this description in connection with dependent arising. So whoever sees dependent arising sees Dharma. Whoever sees Dharma sees the Buddha or sees the Tathagata. These words are very powerful. They're very powerful words in the sense that, well, first of all, dependent arising. Whoever sees dependent arising, the dependent origination, the dependent nature of all phenomena. And here, well, when we say that because of seeing, so seeing dependent arising leads to seeing the Dharma. Here, Dharma, well, there are many different Dharmas. There are Dharma in the sense of phenomena. So they're permanent phenomena, they're impermanent phenomena. Now we're talking about not just phenomena in general. We're not just saying you see all phenomena in that sense, but rather once you understand dependent arising, you understand Dharma. There are special Dharmas that you understand. In the sense that, well, in dependence on dependent arising, understanding dependent arising, you gain an understanding of dependence on causes and conditions. So dependence on causes and conditions, and understanding of the dependence on causes and conditions helps us to gain a higher rebirth in the next life, a better rebirth, a rebirth in one of the fortunate states, and also helps us to understand the law of cause and effect. Therefore, whoever sees dependent arising sees the Dharma, well, refers on one hand to an understanding of the law of karma, the law of cause and effect, what to do in order to be to gain a high rebirth, etc. But more specifically, Rinpoche says here what is meant with Dharma. So whoever sees dependent arising sees Dharma, sees the Dharma. Here, Rinpoche believes that what is meant with Dharma here is selflessness. It is selflessness that we see. Independence on dependent arising, we see selflessness. And as previously mentioned, when Rinpoche described the story, when he summarized the Buddha's life, he mentioned his two tutors, his two teachers who taught him different states of concentrations, different states of higher perceptions, the highest perception possible within samsara. He was taught by these Buddhist teachers, but these concentrative states in the form of these higher perceptions or meditative states, which are the highest possible in samsara. So these states were only able to temporarily eliminate the Buddha's delusions or anyone's delusions. They can only anyone who reaches these concentrative states can only overcome their afflictive emotions temporarily. Now, the means to totally overcome all afflictive emotions, all delusions, is the understanding of selflessness. In what sense? Well, all our sufferings, all our problems arise from our delusions, from our afflictive emotions. And the root of all our afflictive emotions is self-grasping, is grasping at inherent existence. Now, selflessness is the direct opposite of the object of the mind that is the root of samsara. The mind that is the root of samsara is the mind that holds on to inherent existence, that holds on to a self that doesn't exist. Selflessness is the opposite of that. Therefore, it is selflessness or emptiness, as it's also called, that is the Dharma that we understand, independence on dependent arising. So therefore, seeing dependent arising leads to seeing the Dharma, means seeing dependent arising leads us to understanding selflessness. And once we understand selflessness, we're able to first reduce our afflictive emotions, reduce them, and then eventually eliminate them, eliminate their seeds, and even further, as we continue to practice, eliminate also the imprints that were left by these afflictions, which means we're able to eliminate the true obscurations, the obscurations to liberation and the obscurations to enlightenment, and reach the state of a Buddha. This is why whoever sees dependent arising sees the Dharma, that is selflessness. Whoever sees the Dharma, that is selflessness, sees the Buddha, that is reaches the state of a Buddha, reaches that or attains that special wisdom, that special exalted wisdom that is free from any obscurations, that is free from any stains. That is the state of a Buddha, a state of a Tathagata. Therefore, the Buddha himself, who's taught this, the Buddha himself, he's given this teaching on dependent arising. He's taught dependence on causes and conditions, which, as mentioned before, is the means, understanding dependent arising from the point of view of causes and conditions, or dependence on causes and conditions, that helps us to gain a higher rebirth. But there are other types of dependent arising. There's not just dependence on causes and conditions. There's also dependence on parts and dependence on imputation, on mere imputation. Now, with the first type, dependence on causes and conditions, leading or helping us to create the causes for a higher rebirth. With the other two, dependence on parts and dependence on mere imputation, well, that type of dependence, realizing or understanding that type of dependence, enables us to overcome our afflictions, overcomes their seeds, and overcome their imprints. So this kind of teaching, the teaching, this explanation was given by the Buddha. So the Buddha himself taught this, and that's why it said it's only the Buddha who is this kind of teacher, is given this kind of teaching. He's an amazing teacher. He's a lion among teachers. This is what, for instance, Lama Tsongkhapa has said in his praise to dependent arising, and also other teachers, other scholars, other masters of the past have praised the Buddha for exactly that teaching, his teaching on dependent arising, on emptiness, and so forth.
강기 깨단 지보다 순디 이네 방주 땡지드와 중송 통한텔라 차차로 쓰네 땡중송베고네 되도 어다 지 생산도 배제도 쓰네 되바디 여디 먹고 용거를 때 땡중송베 고네 두추디 양내 양도 용돼야 돼. 또 병고 법을루기 투모마인데 그때 개취지 돈에 용돼야지래 딘데 인도 장골로만 정가 준비장 딘데 규찬나 때네 에마 tomba 에마 겹 에마 마초 에마 근 땡진진 렉송베 tomba 텔라다 차차스 어다 딘드라왕 거네 dom바지 인사 만속 단다 강에데 가발 홍대여를 제바이나 랑라 라왕 매바 랭영기 생기 샤왕도 주 semteya lenye ta nyomu be shawan de chune ane le khaya ro ji sa de gone le nyengi gi shawan le wa dus che ane siba ko le chinde ba dile ta trebe gi tap chi di chi ji mo lo be yuda je ba tap da je ba ane ma dom ba zengi di ta tu ba sang ge tum de nya ji ko na yin de ba o tin de yin du de ne ten ji jo le song nye kran la ane ta yin go ru be ten ane cha che ge yis o Emma Machoya, Kenan Resha, Emma Tombaya, Kenan Reshas, or Duce Sundua, Goyan Tilreshas, that under Goyan Shebati, Gome Camele, and Sundenienti, Goyan Cap Zengi in Bechane, and London Zod Zengi in Bechane, and Goyan, and Jibatele, Trova Chini in Bechane, Cap, and the top Chinjimaloba, Yankin in Bechane. Tomba, and Emma Tomba, Emma Cap, Emma Macho, Emma Gonson, could see really and go Nubaminda really what those two are. Think so connect, never connecting or Chevena, Tinjun Round Gone, Kongdu, Tatakata, Tishishiba, Rangi Chitawashi, Nyamsushe, Shene, Telia, Chini Tishini to Larmidam Tsugi, and Shiba Inza, Tatagatas, what to survive. or the or Tatangata ship in Nangaya, Tinjung Tony, Brogoyachi Redua, or those Jenny, Sanjay, Japsudoyagi, Tabatumo might be Jabuya Inaya, tending in the turning nearby, catching show inside.
Now, I guess.
Nagarjuna באחד מהטקסטים שלו
Sorry, technical problem. Anyway, so with regard to dependent arising, therefore, so Nagarjuna, for instance, he has praised the Buddha. He has praised the Buddha exactly for this teaching of dependent arising. So saying that whatever arises, whatever ceases, whatever goes out of existence, so things coming and things going, they all exists because of dependent arising. This is why I prostrate myself, I bow to the great Buddha, the Buddha Shakyamuni, I bow to the great Muni. So Nagarjuna expresses these words, he says these words, or he expresses this kind of praising the Buddha for especially his quality of teaching dependent arising, of giving this amazing explanation of all phenomena existing in dependence on one another. So he gave this teaching on his own accord. He didn't need anyone else to give him a teaching on dependent arising to pass it on, but instead he came up with this concept of dependent arising through his own insights. And so it's Lama Tsongkhapa, for instance, who also praises the Buddha. He praises the Buddha again, saying, for instance, in his text, in his post-dependent arising in verse 8, he's saying that, well, wondrous teacher, you're the wondrous teacher in that you teach, you give this incredible teaching, a teaching that is such that all afflictive emotions are overcome, all the afflictive emotions that arise in our continuum because of our wrong views, of our misapprehension of reality, our misapprehension with regard to how phenomena actually exist. So these misapprehensions, they give rise to all our afflictive emotions, and it is through this understanding of dependent arising, that we can overcome all our misapprehension, and in that way we can overcome all other afflictive emotions that arise from this basic wrong view with regard to reality. So this is why the Lama Tsongkhapa in his praise to the Buddha, he says, wondrous teacher, wondrous refuge. So the Buddha is our refuge. The Buddha is this teaching on dependent arising is a refuge because it helps us to overcome the root causes of all our sufferings, and in that way overcome suffering itself. And then again, wondrous speaker, also there's on the screen. So wondrous speaker, he's the wondrous speaker in the sense that he has taught this, he's given this incredible teaching on exactly dependent arising, emptiness, etc. And wondrous saver. So protecting us, this protects us. The teacher protects us through these teachings that he has given. In that way, Lama Tsongkhapa goes on to say, I pay homage to that teacher who taught well dependent origination. That's why we call the Buddha the Tathagata, which basically means the one who's gone beyond, who's thus gone beyond being an ordinary person, being an unenlightened person with an obstructed mind. Therefore, it is said that he's the real Buddha. He's this incredible teacher. He's this wondrous speaker, this wondrous refuge, this wondrous saver, in that he gave this very teaching on the basis of which we can overcome all our afflictions, we can overcome all our shortcomings, and eventually reach that same state. So Rinpoche repeated that a few times, being a wondrous teaching, being so the Buddha being a wondrous teacher, being described as a wondrous teacher, a wondrous refuge, a wondrous speaker, a wondrous saver. That is mainly because of dependent arising.
מאחר וקודם כל בשורש מצבי התודעה האחרים יש לנו את הבערות, אנחנו שולטים על ידי בערות, מצבי תודעה האחרים, שגורמים לנו לבצע פעולות שמסתיימות במעגל הסמסרי. והשיעורים של הבודה, הבודה נתן שיעורים, הבודה היחידי שנתן את השיעורים שמאפשרים לנו להפסיק את התהליך הסמסרי הזה. ולכן המילה תתגתה בעצמה, the one thus gone, אחת המשמעויות שלה זה שהבודה הגיע למצב שבו הוא לא עלה, הוא לא יצא מהמצב הזה, הוא הגיע למצב הסופי, הוא לא יצא מהמצב הזה לאחר מכן, the state of non-arising from that, ולכן הוא הפך להיות תתגתה. זה נקודה שהיא ייחודית לבודה, נקודה שלפחות עבורנו יש לה חשיבות גדולה בהבנה של הבודה. הסולה.
다다 땡땡 던지기 코랑 땡땡도 땡땡님도 도 코랑 우테가라 파티이티 아리아 파티이티 samupata 선다 간다 파바 땡지다와 중화사 저다 파바 사이다 아리아 뜻에 딱 디아 표정마다 있나 파티이티 samupata 이티야 samupata 사 땡중 땡지다와 중화사 다 들어와 시티 pati iti samupata sayatila ene chetu ten sung thanyi chi jaya chi ma sungshe gyune yungudwa che sayag koya chi yoris tu sayag koya chi yoris ten sayag koya chi yoris che sayati yuda kenle en judandi chichawa jungares gyunde te jung che sayati tingi yoris ta tene deux sayati chashel tebas ta gunde tenju shebaina dujik tenju mato en koya medingi ta tele ba test tarma chindu chashel tebas deux sayati chashel tebas de indu chashel tebas sayati duje da dumachi che kangalol ya chaptuya chi pena namgata buthya en chashel tebas en shajo namga nucho namga san an dus cheje jongling tingi namga san ota tnes cheje and chashel te ta tene ten sayati and dakshin ngene sena chungse kyang nye tu meba mingi tanye wangi shasamgi and chajegi namsha joyati mingya tayo chama tene and ta sha saji what to ten set ta pati iti samupata setla and chess set gyunde tenjung and two set chashir tebata ten set mingya tayo chamgi tenjung sin ta tenjung minda chara sum ma kodaya ji yede bache ta gyunde tenjung ngebe thone tagi kondu shibana shire lende gilando la tsushindu ene gyunde tenjungi tenshebe bone lende la yichebe bone dibungi du migi chubungi tsudung lamne ane ngendu nele dobe ngontu tensan dubya o ta chashel tebe tenjung ta labar tu mingya tayo changi tenjung ngebe thone ane dadu zimbe dangzile choya o tinde indu nega gu dubjadi gyunde tenjung la ten ngebe thone nega gu dubja ngondu dubuyo ba ta chashel tebe tende da mingya tayo changi tende la tene ane tadugi dubjati dubuyo da ba tende indu manzu choli kyapsu cho sin 산절 겹쳐 철 겹쳐 긴들 겹쳐 또 남바지 인친제라 직대 표주 단계 열에 겹순로에 유티 숨치고래 취디 딱 잡무레스 제제 숨기요래 취겹무 인루디 레셰 삽슈디 땡중 땡들기 엔 직디 토네 어다 니 몬도 내도 그 정원도 간데스 두부요메 디야 탑디 토네 땡기요 중 직디 토네 땡기요 니리 타바다 탐제 템바 디야 탑 디토네 식 디토네 아니 땡기여 대봐 딘데지 인도 아니 뱅고 바발루 두고 자와 셰레 만레 레다 뇽모 세베 탑 레다 뇽모 남도레 대다 쩨레 쩨바니 동바 니두 가벌 동바 니지 가벌 무슨 경저 신노 어떻게 지금이라 니 페이지 따는 것도와 꼭다 오늘 자네기 쩨레 잡순 로당기 내가 때와디 인중디 내가 셰베 토네 용대야 가르르스나 타바스니리 룸바신다 지금 봐야 말이스 누구 디게라 나네 눈동바 주신 디게 나네 타바 톱 모톱사야지 깨자레스 지시 레다 녀몽기 칭칭제들라 코로바 차버레스 레다 녀몽디 녀보 다음에 또 베셔라 동료 또 베셔라 지기 딘디지기 된지 녜베 토네 아니 남시기 제 레다 녀몽들레 아니 라르미게 추진도 제소나 녀몰라 미게 최전도 제소나 타르바레스 다 딘데 레뉴디 칸네 충바레스 인디 다 수미이지 남도를 중 수미이지 남도데 딘징기 쩌발을 중 딘징기 쩌바티 순고버 지그스나 대단 진당 무슨가베 돈이 또 베셔라 다음에 또 베셔라비 아니 다 고버 지그레스 노 디기 다 고와 고단 칸데이 고아들의 조당 칸데 추건조 짭당 칸데 디트 차상 디 쇼로 같이나데 엔세브 쇼용도 추건조를 짭스 추어시베 추건조 짭무 인단데야 땡중 된디 내야데 개좀 쉬고 차데도
שם של הסוטרה.
Now with regard to dependent arising, now everything is dependently arisen. Everything that exists, permanent or impermanent, is dependently risen. So Rinpoche said, well, if we look at the sutra itself, here it says at the very beginning, the sutra starts with its Sanskrit, Arya, which means noble, Arya, the noble, Pratitya Samutpadanama. So that means dependent arising. So these words Pratitya Samutpadanama mean dependent or originated or dependent arising or dependently arisen. Now when we talk about these words, these Sanskrit words, dependent arising, that usually translated into English as dependent origination or dependent arising, actually here dependence has three aspects. It refers to three aspects. The first is meeting. It has this, it's explained to mean to meet, to come together. The next is to rely on. And the third is to depend on. So these are these three characteristics of dependent arising: to come together, to rely on, and to depend. Now, when it comes to the first meaning, talking about coming together, meeting or coming together, this describes dependence on causes and conditions, in that certain causes, certain conditions have to meet, in other words, have to come together in order for something particular to arise, for a particular phenomenon to arise. Therefore, that is the first aspect of coming together. And then second is reliance, to rely on something, to not be able to exist without it, in the sense of phenomena having parts. A phenomenon, a whole has parts that it relies upon. And then the third aspect describes dependence on imputation, dependence on labeling. Now, these are the three aspects, the three kind of characteristics, if you like, of dependent arising, as described in the title of the Sutra on dependent arising. Now, all phenomena are dependently arisen. Of course, not all phenomena depend on causes and conditions. So therefore, in terms of coming together, this characteristic of dependent arising of coming together only includes impermanent phenomena. Only impermanent phenomena arise in dependence on causes and conditions. However, when it comes to dependence on parts, so relying on parts or dependence on parts, well, here all phenomena, permanent or impermanent, depend on parts. So if you have, for instance, if you take unconditioned space depends on other aspects, depends on parts, depends on the west, the north, etc., depends on this world and so forth. So it's got certain parts, it's got certain aspects. Therefore, we can say that whatever exists is a dependently arisen phenomenon. And in particular, when it comes to dependence on name, like phenomena being dependent. So as said earlier, so they come together in dependence on causes and conditions. So the coming together of causes and conditions, the reliance on parts, but then there's also dependence on being merely labeled, not having an essence, therefore. So phenomena are merely labeled, they're merely designated by conceptual consciousness, being given a certain name, being given a certain term, or a certain kind of concept being ascribed to them. So therefore, phenomena don't exist in and of themselves. They have no actual essence because they're merely designated. This is what we need to understand. So in terms of dependent arising, what we need to understand is these three aspects. Now, understanding dependence on causes and conditions with regard to the coming together, that helps us to, first of all, understand the law of karma, the law of cause and effect, and learn what we should avoid and what we should adopt, in particular in the context of the 10 non-virtues, so to avoid the 10 non-virtues and instead adopt the 10 virtues. However, this is only from the point of view of the kind of foundation, the practices that create the right kind of circumstances to then apply the next type of dependent arising, dependence on the next two types. So dependence on parts and dependence on mere labeling. Those help us, those two types of dependent arising, they help us to overcome self-grasping. Therefore, it is with regard to the first type of dependent arising, dependence on causes and conditions, where the coming together of causes and conditions lead to certain results. Well, that is only temporarily helping us to gain a higher state, to gain a higher rebirth, etc. Now, the latter two types of dependent arising that are described as reliance on parts, and dependence on mere labeling, those two are responsible or help us to achieve liberation and enlightenment. Therefore, we take refuge. Well, usually we take refuge, we take refuge in the Dharma, we take refuge in the Buddha, we take refuge in the Supreme Assembly or the Sangha. In general, yeah, we take refuge in what are called the three jewels. But the real refuge is the Dharma. The Dharma is the real refuge. So of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, mainly rely on the Dharma. And what is that real refuge, the Dharma? What does it refer to? It refers to dependent arising. it refers to dependent arising in that it teaches us what we need to do to reach higher states, even within samsara, as a method to then eventually overcome samsara, that is, reach liberation and liberation or enlightenment. Therefore, it's important, therefore, to understand that, well, first to grasp that the law of cause and effect being the basis, and based on that, the understanding of the other two types of dependent arising, from there, we can overcome samsara, we can reach the final goal. Now, Rinpoche said this has also been described by Nagarjuna in his text Fundamental Wisdom. So in the Fundamental Wisdom in chapter 18 verse 5, oh there it is, there it says that through the elimination of karma and affliction, there's liberation. So the elimination of karma and affliction, there's liberation. I've got a different translation here, but anyway, so here karma and affliction, they arise from that root misapprehension. So the root misapprehension of reality gives rise to the other afflictions, and that in turn gives rise to karma. Now, because they can be eliminated, therefore there's liberation. And karma and affliction, they come from misconceptions, which in this case is the exaggerating attitude. So the attitude that, based on the misapprehension of reality, of grasping onto inherent existence, exaggerates the positive or negative aspects of these phenomena. These misconceptions, or this exaggerating attitude, they arise from mental fabrications. Mental fabrications, or mental elaborations here, is grasping at inherent existence, the mind that grasps at inherent existence. And these fabrications, they cease through emptiness. So the fabrications or the elaborations, they're eliminated through emptiness. And as His Holiness often says, through emptiness in Sanskrit, as it's translated usually as like through realizing emptiness, can also be translated as within emptiness. So fabrication cease within emptiness. Now, never mind whichever way you look at it, His Holiness usually gives both interpretation or both descriptions. But anyway, it is, we eliminate karma and affliction by way of eliminating misconceptions, and they're eliminated by way of mental fabrication, and that is done through emptiness or within emptiness. So this is the way to overcome, therefore, samsara. I'll continue later.
Tande party it samupata sag sit tindeji mato yo marete tigi ta jojat badus jichirina shiba dus ba tamba ina o gibuchung을 chör 참 원도 주제가 참 gibuchung을 chör 엔 타바점 아니 지 레녀기 청활을 들어 타바점 주제기 아니 지 단데 gibuchung이 chör 다 타바점 많이 봐 타바 전부 미네베 냥대기 주제기 아니 탑디 아니 탑 장주기 심기 심베 아니 지 아니 조기 심베 돈이 도베 다음에 도베 이시 돈이 인진인 거제 근데 지금 남나 때네 아니 용무베 드바 빵와 좀더 마세 시제 드바야 아니 빵베 등이 말루버 트베 아니 타바 전부 두스 드비야기 용수 조베 저자디 파티 이티 사무파타 사야기 치티난데 아니 용투야지 이해되지 어디 야침부 시부지 이해되지 딱 뭐나 자네기 지 시베 칭화를 쓰기 연나래 단 시신이게 집발 쓰기 연나래 근데지래 저지 고고연나 저와지 고고연나 저베 탑디 컨디저스나 된다베기 된디 잡아 중매기 최근에 다 shebe tone, nyamsulembe tone, tan roya mato tele shebe tap surbachik tani medeba, tan number tabe go tegarangla nyedeba, di indu namdar gose, tanya tindi inguduwa namdar gosum, namdar goshis, che nam ngu demba trube tonga, yu demba trube samashiwa, dribu dembe memba meba asine, namdar gosum, kandati tongba ni kejarwa, da mebe tensum sungoarwa, o da di ene chawada cheba ina namdar goshire, namgyu yongrala namdar gosumre, o da number ta ngili kowe chingwale trube, ngili tobe, ene 타방 탐지 기회 고마터베기 아니 고르버디 온다 데럭 코날라 네바 인자 남다르 보스 당연히 따바르바 오 디인디 최 건조디 겹뇌 셰바 잡발라야 땡지 드바 중에 20 네고야지요 땡지 드바 중에 20 지 네바 이나 알레 당고 땡지 드바 중화사기 치 코란도 토네 담바니 담바시 땡지 라 중이 되게 상마 조자 디나네 아니 땡지 드바 중화 사기 치 디나네 등기에 되바 어다 되게 디 야치부 시부래도
Now, with regard to what Rinpoche said, the last part from what Rinpoche said previously, so with regard to liberation, therefore, liberation we should understand is not a different place. It's not a place that we go to. Instead, it's because of our karma and our afflictions that we are within samsara, and we can overcome this through, therefore, realizing selflessness, as this is described, for instance, in Nagarjuna's verse that was taught previously. So now with regard to the next part that Rinpoche taught, well, Rinpoche said it's probably from the precious garland. Rinpoche wasn't sure. It says that first we just overcome, we try to gain a higher state, and then we try to totally overcome samsara. Now here with regard to the kind of goal when we talk about Buddhist practice, well, first of all, we all want to be happy. None of us want to suffer. And so it's in stages that we overcome suffering, overcome that which is in the way to our happiness, which is therefore why, which is why in the texts there are like 3 levels described. There are the practices that are common to a person of lower spiritual capacity, and then there are the practices for a person of that are common to a person of middling spiritual capacity, and there are the practices of a person of higher spiritual capacity. Now, with regard to the practices that are common to a person of lower spiritual capacity, well, based on these teachings, or with regard to these teachings, we observe the law of cause and effect, the law of karma, and again here dependent arising describes exactly that, dependence on causes and conditions in the sense of karma. And then there are the practices of a person of middling spiritual capacity, of overcoming cyclic existence, of overcoming samsara, in the sense of realizing dependent arising, realizing emptiness, and in that way overcoming or eliminating afflictive emotions, overcoming the root of samsara and reaching the liberated state, the state of nirvana. And then there are the practices of a person of higher spiritual capacity. So here, taking the understanding of emptiness, again, based on realizing, or based on dependent arising, then the mind realizing emptiness is generated, but this mind is now conjoined with the mind of enlightenment, with bodhicitta. It's conjoined with great compassion, and based on that, practitioners then reach the enlightened state of a Buddha. So it's all part of this pratitya samuppada, as it is described here. So pratitya samuppada, it describes all these aspects. It describes these different practices. For instance, when we talk of emptiness, there are ways to describe emptiness, again, based on dependent arising, in terms of the 3 gates of liberation. Something called the 3 gates of liberation, and sometimes it's described as the 4 types of liberation. So what are these 3 types of liberation? They're usually translated as aspirationlessness, attributelessness, and the state of deliverance. So these three doors, what do they actually refer to? They refer to emptiness, but they describe emptiness in slightly different ways. So one type is just the emptiness with regard to phenomena being causes, the emptiness of phenomena being results, and the emptiness of phenomena with regard to the actual nature. So this is the three gates of liberation, or the three approaches to liberation. They really describe emptiness, again, on the basis of dependent arising, describing the object that is empty, either from the point of view being the nature of something, being a cause, or being a result. And then there's also a way in which four doors of liberation are described, which is just a slightly different way of going about it, where it's just the emptiness itself. And then you have, as previously, like the aspirationlessness, the signlessness, and the non-compoundedness. Those are the four types. But it doesn't matter, as Rinpoche says, whether you talk about the three types of the three approaches to emptiness, or the four approaches to emptiness. In any way, it's dependent arising. That is the basis for that. So it is in order to overcome, therefore, all the obscurations to liberation, obscurations to enlightenment. That's the eventual goal. And that is possible on the basis of understanding dependent origination, dependent arising. And it's basically in order to I mean, all the concepts, all the ideas that are described in Buddhism, all the different concepts are all based on dependent arising. So as described in Pratitya Samuppada, as we can see in the title of the sutra, therefore, well, any kind of Buddhist concept encompasses dependent origination. So it encompasses the true truth, for instance, the Four Noble Truth, and all the other concepts. And in that way, we can say dependent arising is far-reaching. It's extremely extensive in that really all Buddhist concepts are based on this particular concept. So just to repeat the three approaches to liberation, or the three gates of liberation, you have, first of all, the approach of emptiness itself, as it's called, or the gate to liberation called emptiness. Then there's aspirationlessness and attributelessness. So these two refer to the lack of inherent existence of something being the nature, being the entity, or existing as an entity. Then the emptiness of phenomena acting as a cause, and the emptiness of phenomena acting as a result. So therefore, those are the three doors, and sometimes a fourth door is also described.
החוליות של התהוות בתלות. כל אלה אנחנו יכולים לדבר על כל הנושאים האלה בפרטי פרטים, וכולם הם הרחבות של הנושא של התהוות בתלות. שאלה אחת שעלתה פה בצ'אט, מה זה עודפות? עודפות זה elaboration באנגלית.
תתי דמבני גנמשה, דמבשי נמשה, תנה תנדי אלא צ'וני גנמשה, תצו יונס זובה, פרטי דסמופדה סאב, תנדיגי, נימבדי צידינליה, תנדי יבגי, קונדובתי קנדדוס, 슈베이나, 단다 땡땡이 도 코랑기, 다 숭스나메도, 어틸라, 다 땡땡이 뭐가, 땡땡이 뭐 숭스 개발지 무도와, 다 몰라 오미여버체, 죽了소아여버체, 도스치나 땡땡이 뭐가 차거도와, 몰라 옴다 죽了소아메버체, 거 카투 예다만네 말 라바이나 땡땡이 뭐 숭스, 대다한테 도그나라 용도와. 다 예다마 스드 동해 데바티 모잖아 해도 પર바와 신두 유군준 데바티 아니 모잖아 해도 때켄 따단가도 세비 델린 고바 세비 고텐데체 here what the taken sayo neroda sayatigi and Gejung Chembo the Gesung said Piji Ruyore or Kanda Chernam Tamji Yulechum said he Dunga Dembata Yukunju Debani Motrice Chernam Tamje Chudi Kondig Dubi Chugang Kejam Koya Dubi Chudi Zol Ma Sumni Chernam Tamje and Gume Kemene Chungara Mare Mitumbi Gule Chungaya Mare Tabaranju Gule Chungaya Mare or that Karil Chumbaresna and Tumbe Gu and Lenyole to Koya Dubi Chudi Chumbares Chona Tamje Gule Chums that Tigu Tishin Shibe Sums the Guti Candidaresna you Lenyon the only Chunga Imbati and Tishibe to Cheka numbers and Puning your moncho Gundegis Bati to nature. That you love Boba Kaim Basit, and you could do them a Lenyon Yaputi, Trotapchi Yorebe, Trotapchi Neverebe, Chevaina, that Trotapchi Yedeva, Carisna, Tinde Yomonte, Lububa Imba, and Chinchi Logo Loyimba, Lububa Imba, Tindechi Indu, or that tea, and Chichi Maloba, Yan Tabe, Tekonani, Damebe, Tensheva, Tuni Tensheva, Tindechi, Toki, and Larmi give it children to Chene, and go what the Togres, you love Goba Kaimbas, or that Tea, and Top Jaki, Lamchi Yamsolembe, Gone Togu, the Top Jake Carlesna, Damebe turn Tombo, Tujung Dana Pop, and some Jung Dana Pop, then a Gomjung Dana Pop, those Chene and Robo we do, or Tosam Dana Babel, Solom Check, Gate, and then Gate Shiving, Tosam Dana Babate, Gate Tambut check, Gomjung Dana Babate, and Gatiniva Jolam to check. Parangati City, Musung to Neve Toki, and Telia, Muking Buchachi, what in Gotu in Guyavinza, Parangati Tonam check, Parasam Gate, and the Sabian the Chavitina, machine the Pombe, Pongi, Lam machine the Pongi, Gonon to check, Larmi give it children telling your mom develop to Hati, and Bodi saw said, what Lamna is Betone, and Dame 20 is machine to Nevala 10, and Yukunjun. And Rubashi to Pong to Tabriba, what to suggest, Gulam Boba, Kaimba, the Junction with Tege, soon said the Bashigan of Shati, Seshi Tabaji, Sunguya Debati, Kandatendi, Pati, the Samupata Shebatigi, Tenditi, and the Bashigan Tennis, Sunguya Debati. The Bashigan Namshati, and Shiti Kavatil 2 hours now. Nansuta needs to need come 2 years. Nanzam Tele. Chashi Shembe Gone and Tataratu and Truve Wangi, she called Kogieva. Nanzam tea, Matsimba, Nerugi Tun, Yapuching Evaina, now at the Matu, Nerugi Tun Evaina, and the Namjan Chogi, Tap Jungle in Beton, call it Tuavi, Tapchi, a young Gieva. Tendeinza, Dishi, Jundo Rimbati, and Demaniki Sala, 2 Degia Deva. Or Tendeindu, Jawaishi, she Netsu, Dini Tuation. Dishi Koa Jundo Chishing, Seme Tambe, Japsum Tabate, Talon Zawa Super Chingy Lobson, or Tinjungi, and the Tinjupati said, Nanga Tish Shimbe Tone, or Taman Chess Control Singing, Nanga Chimbo Tindish Reshan, Tisushing to Tin the Sange, Hale Tindegi, Tananga Chimus Reshadu, Soso Rani, Lamti, Mibatasaki, Ginduti, Ditabu Lamutene, and she want to travel and Chunga Reshan do Diana, Mandin Lamaya, and Jita Shan Kangikan, and Doctor Mebeki, Tabatembian, and then they are shooting Saji, and Lolly and Yavinia to Aji, and young to Aji, or Tennessee, young to Aji, go rest, Cheche, the Kanangadua.
So we.
So Conjo Sen, Hamachuji Shebe Kabu, Dubarango, Deni, Netsu Yabochi, Shebaina, and Telaten, Dishi, and Kunjang Jundo, the Shingres, Dudan Demba Namtanis. Dishensona, and Sanje Conjo Chu, Conjo Gindu Conjola, Cement having ever yaji, Gures, Sanjela, so Conjo Sums. And Tindeji Chosona, and she machine Zundula Sobe, and Lamala Tunduta, Yosumanga Tundul Soba, and the Damalamati, and Yungures, Tikung Japan, then Yongo Jing and it in a Sungudua.
Now, with regard to the true truth, when we talk about the true truth or the Four Noble Truth, well, they're actually described here in this mantra. If you look at the text itself, the Sutra on Dependent Arising, so it says Yed Dharma. So Yed Dharma describes the truth of suffering. Actually, when we say a mantra here, we distinguish between a mantra and a dharani. So actually, a mantra is, strictly speaking, are words in a language such as Sanskrit that start with Om and end with Soa. So this is really, strictly speaking, a mantra. Then if it doesn't have Om, that doesn't have Om and doesn't have Soa at the end, it's called a Sung in Tibetan, or a dharani. So here in this case, really, strictly speaking, it's more a dharani than it is a mantra. But it shows us that even in the sutric system of Buddhism, you have something like mantra, or you have these dharanis in this case here. Anyway, so they do describe these words here. They actually describe the verse that is right underneath it, all phenomena that arise from causes and so forth, in that Dhamma describes the truth of suffering. Then Hetu Brava describes the origin of suffering. And then the next words, Hetum Tesam Tathagato, that describes the truth of cessation. The truth of cessation. And then the path is basically described by the following words, Hi Avadad Tesam Sayo Nirodha. So these words describe then the path. And in other words, they describe, of course, it's translated then right underneath it in this verse, all phenomena that arise from causes, the Tathagata has taught their cause, and that which is their cessation, thus has proclaimed the great renunciant. Those are really the words, or that's the translation of the word of this dharani that Rinpoche previously went through. Now, with regard to the cause of the truth of suffering and the origin of suffering, here again, of course, dependent arising is the basis. In that, phenomena arise from causes. All phenomena that arise from causes. That means whatever phenomenon, whatever impermanent phenomenon, well, it arises in dependence on its own causes. And what are these causes? Well, they're not permanent causes. They're not causes that are not able to give rise to a particular result, but rather they correspond to that result. And in that way, certain phenomena, well, they arise in dependence. For instance, our suffering is a result of karma and afflictions. And that describes the afflicted aspect, therefore. So all phenomena in terms of the afflicted aspect, here the samsaric causes that give rise to samsaric results, well, all of those phenomena that have causes, so the Tathagata has taught their cause, in that the cause that corresponds to them, karma and afflictions, and because they have a cause, all these samsaric results, since they have a cause, that is karma and afflictions, they're only temporary. They can be removed. They're based on a misapprehension of reality, and it's really, if we understand that misapprehension and apply an antidote, the antidote of realizing suchness, then we can overcome this. We can reach the cessation. So therefore, as it says, all phenomena that arise from causes, from particular causes that are not permanent, that correspond to the result, well, the Tathagata has taught their cause, in particular with regard to the truth of suffering and the origin of suffering. So all phenomena that arise from causes are the truth of suffering, and then the origin of suffering are karma and afflictions. And since those are just temporary and temporary, and since they're based on a misapprehension that can be removed, then a cessation can be attained. So it is possible to attain what is called the sensation. And that process of well, first recognizing the truth of suffering and then its causes, which is the origin of suffering, and then applying the antidote, well, realizing that there is an elimination or the cessation of suffering, and then applying a path, well, that describes the Four Noble Truths. And so the path here, when we talk about the path, that is also indicated by the mantra Gate Gate Parasamgata Buddhya Soha. In the Heart Sutra, you have this mantra. So what does it describe? It describes exactly these steps of overcoming suffering by way of overcoming the origin of suffering. So first you reach the path of accumulation that is described by the first Gate. Then your understanding, the realization you've gained on the basis of the path of accumulation, you attain a meditative state, or you attain a mind that arises from a meditative state that is a union of karma binding and special insight, that kind of meditative state, and that is the path of preparation. So the second Gate indicates the path of preparation. And then the next syllable, as part of the mantra Gate Gate Paragate, or the Rani Gate Gate Paragate. So Paragate is the next word, which indicates the path of seeing. This is where you start to actually eliminate the afflictive emotions together with their seeds. And then as you continue on the path, so on the path of seeing, as you continue meditating, then you reach Parasamgata, which is the path of meditation, where you continuously eliminate, well, the innate afflictions, the innate obscurations, and then eventually also eliminate the imprints. That is, first you eliminate the innate obscurations to liberation, and then you eliminate the imprints or the cognitive obscurations, the obscurations to enlightenment. And in that way, Bodhisattva, you reach the enlightened state of a Buddha. Therefore, it's on the basis of these five paths, going through the five paths or achieving the five paths, that you reach the final goal of Buddhahood. And that's why Rinpoche says there are two aspects. There are two aspects with regard to phenomena. There's their way of appearance, the way they appear to us, their mere appearance, in other words, and then the way in which they actually exist. Now, their mere appearance, the way they appear to us, that mere appearance, that describes samsara. Then the way in which they actually exist, that describes liberation or enlightenment. And this is something that His Holiness also talks about, that it is the basis, it's the basis of dependent arising. That is, the basis is dependent arising. On the basis of that, we then come to understand that phenomena don't have inherent attributes, etc., and are therefore then able, on the basis of that, we're able to reach the state of liberation or enlightenment. On the basis, of course, then based on the path. So we rely on the path, and in reliance on that path, we will eventually attain enlightenment. So this is something His Holiness also always mentions, that kind of process of first depending on or basing our understanding on the understanding of dependent arising, gaining understanding of that, and then slowly realizing emptiness, and etc. And so then through by traveling or by developing the five paths, attain that state of a Buddha. And here, this is also described in connection to the true truth and the Four Noble Truths that Rinpoche mentioned earlier. Well, for instance, Maitreya says in his Abhisamaya Alamkara, in his text Abhisamaya Alamkara, there's these verses which describe, first of all, they say, first there's the first there is the practice, then there are these aspects, and then there are the three types of refuge. So that means, in other words, this verse from the Abhisamaya Alamkara, the Ornament for Clear Realization by Maitreya, it describes, first of all, the true truth. First, it says there are the true truth, then there are the Four Noble Truths, and then there's refuge. And then based on that, you have the three types of enthusiastic effort. In other words, understanding the true truth, the conventional and the ultimate truth. On the basis of that, we can then understand the Four Noble Truths as they're described by this verse, all phenomena that arise from causes and so forth. This verse, which is the essence of the Sutra on dependent arising. So we can come to understand that. And then once we understand the Four Noble Truths, based on the understanding of the true truth, we then come to understand refuge. We can effectively take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And having done that, we then depend on the three types of enthusiastic effort, or the three types of diligence. Therefore, in that way, this verse here is describing the Four Noble Truths, whether it's the verse or it's the Dharani here, whether it's the Sanskrit version or it is the translated version in either Tibetan or English. But what they describe here, what they describe are the Four Noble Truths. So it's based on the understanding of dependent arising, then the Four Noble Truths in describing first the all phenomena that arise from causes, which is the truth of suffering, then their causes, which is the origin of suffering, and then that which is their cessation, which describes the reverse, in that you are able to eliminate that elimination of the origin of suffering by way of realizing emptiness based on dependent arising, and that is possible then through a path.
Okay.
So Rinpoche says time is up. We've taught, we've gone for an hour and a half. Rinpoche has taught for an hour and a half. And now we've got half an hour left. So it's up to you if you would like to ask some questions. This is the time to, present your questions. And if there are no questions, Rinpoche will continue to teach.
Okay, thank you, Rinpoche. So we'll have now the question and answer session, and the questions will be read by the respective language assistants. We will start with a question from the Hebrew-speaking audience, and please note that as there are many questions, please be aware that time is very short and not all the questions would be answered. For the Hebrew speakers, בעוד שעה, ב-13:30, ניפגש כאן עם אותו הקישור בזום לסשן שאלות ותשובות עם הנזיר קרצון, כולם מוזמנים. And the question in Hebrew is from Shaked Reich, who asks whether Rinpoche could elaborate on whether the state of enlightenment arises dependently, and if so, how can it be ultimate?
Rinpoche di kande chi resena chanchugi kupan di chik tembala tene togirebes kesi chanchugi kupan shenda temba ina di duntamba imba kande chi shayores
세부직 저와도 세부직 중마소 양조진다
gonda nga dende pike dende koptoresha tadi dila tuya de karresena dila tuya tini di karelagi resena chanchugi kupandi nganso nyamlen chebala tene togires chenzandi tenjures ine ta kashigi karlagi resena chanchugi kupandi duntambains duntambaina shena mitobe shena matemba denda wachikoachi ligires. Chezan tunta na shena mitoba shena matemba chi na chanjugo pan shembala tene top gireves yam matemba matoba chi ingo gireves.
Chandar kirti dawa tabe umanjugo ngotela nyintu sanje ndinam tuanche sanje chanju sembal le tungshin shebe sanje chanju sembal le tungzu ma sumbe kabla randa yu tade de kywe chanju sembe yongzi chabal tene chung randa yu ji de kywe chanju sembe lam nyamso lambal tene chung sene ji sungo arti tande thwatila nen takta dure karasna randa yu tade be chanju sembe jambela soba tinde gi ane ji chwe tembal tene kanda thosam gomsongo dogo rwa thoba meba da thoba meba samba yungo mare thoba ti shengi shung ma jeshe jabje ene delatene sosu gulia jita di ma don rosa mindu sam cheba chebe dibu samjung lo chike tetar kebe lo tela yanne yandu dibe che kombarchene komjung singde ya yongwa jire tinde indu shana tene chungbat imbate sangye changju sambale thungshin sa tigi sew chabare ta ona shana tene bachigo chig thone rang kake chemo tinde member re o randa gyuchig du kyube lam nyamsul lamar tene chungare ta ona changju de den dambar rebe sagi dondam de kunjob da dondam news chebe dondam demba o ji den damba o tinde chigi 계제 시바이나 된다음에 창주지 된대 용거래 타르투고 창주지 용거래 레마도 지기 에네 넘버2배 던담 된대지기 엔 창주지 여러분에서나 따던 잔이 녜베 창주지 여러분에서나 디 여마르바스 가르르서나 알레신다 파샤 그 간전 중기 개바 에네 디즈멜라레베 짱스 던담 덴베 왕도네 길레 산게 니가메스 기 생년대 돈다데바 원진 니가 말해라 상게 생년대야 돈다데바 원진 니가 말해 루자사다 람다 생년대 돈다데바 원진 니가 말했어 이제 지즈멜라르베야 근데 순구도와 어다 디콩디 되네 야가빈도 콩드네 다 시라기 세보여래 디래 다 어딘지래 디인도 돈담 생년대 다지 오늘 단에기 지 Nilu chitawa shindu ane dem sibe tenta dardo dembe tende chigi ane ji ta chanjuji yorwesna yots inaya ane tadon zane ngebe tomtom demba ji yobesna mes ma tende chi labi debar jido.
Now it's said, for instance, in
I have this verse here.
first, yeah.
Okay.
The very first one, yeah. So anyways, with regard to this question, well, first of all, there is a verse at the very beginning, the very first verse really of the entering into the middle way. It says, here a middling realizes, here it is, are born from the powerful Buddhas or the kings of subduers, and Buddhas are born from Bodhisattvas. So this line here, Buddhas are born through Bodhisattvas. It means Buddhas have arisen from Bodhisattvas. Now, this shows that actually a Buddha is dependent on certain aspects. So here, what it is dependent on in terms of a cause are Bodhisattvas. Now, what does that mean? A Buddha is dependent on Bodhisattvas. Well, it can mean Bodhisattvas who are other than, who are a different continuum than this Buddha. So let's say a Buddha on their way to becoming a Buddha as a Bodhisattva depend on other Bodhisattvas like Manjushri and so forth who give them teachings. Therefore, this person who receives teachings from Manjushri, once they become a Buddha, well, they depended on Bodhisattvas like Manjushri, other Bodhisattvas. So such a Buddha has arisen in dependence on or has been born from the Bodhisattva Manjushri. But it can also mean from one's own continuum. So any Buddha was previously to becoming a Buddha, was previously a Bodhisattva. So you can't be a Buddha without having been a Bodhisattva before that. And again, a Buddha is born from a Bodhisattva means not just from a Bodhisattva who's another person, but a Buddha is also a continuation of his own, previous continuum as a bodhisattva. And that bodhisattva, the practices of that bodhisattva who listened, who reflected, who meditated, and in that way slowly overcame what had to be overcome and so forth, then reached the enlightened state of a Buddha. Therefore, it is very clear that a Buddha has arisen. So the enlightened state of a Buddha has arisen in dependence on other factors. And in this case here, it's dependent on bodhisattvas, bodhisattvas who are different beings or who are of the same continuum. So different moments of a previous bodhisattvas or a different person. Now, of course, when we say this Buddha has achieved the ultimate state, this is not saying that the ultimate state has attained enlightenment, that is the ultimate enlightenment. Here, the word ultimate does not indicate ultimately existent, which is just another way of saying truly existent. So it's not saying that the enlightened state of a Buddha is truly existent, that the enlightened state of a Buddha has not been merely labeled on the basis of conceptions and names and so forth. No, of course, even the enlightened state of a Buddha is merely labeled. It doesn't exist truly. Therefore, when we talk of the ultimate state, what is meant is not that it's ultimately existent, that it's truly existent, but rather that it's not the ordinary conventional, if you like, state, but it's the final, it's that final state, it's the ultimate final state that can be reached. That's what the word ultimate enlightenment refers to. And this is supported by the great Indian scholars, the Indian masters, and therefore also Milarepa has said, well, an ultimately existent enlightenment is not possible. An ultimately existent path is not possible. An ultimately existent practice is not possible. So nothing can arise, nothing can come into existence in dependence on something ultimately existent. In fact, nothing can exist if it's ultimately existent. Therefore, in answer to that question, of course, a Buddha depends on causes and conditions. Enlightenment is dependent on, causes and conditions and other factors. So therefore, it is an ultimate state, but not because it's ultimately existent, ultimately or independently existent, but rather because it's the final state.
רימפוצ'ה אומר שמנקודת המבט הזאת, ההערה היא לא המוחלט, כי אי אפשר למצוא את ההערה כשמחפשים אותה, וזה גם מה שמילרפה התכוון אליו כשהוא דיבר עליו, כשהוא אומר כשאנחנו בוחנים את ההערה מנקודת המבט מהפרספקטיבה של המוחלט, אז הוא אומר שאי אפשר למצוא את ההערה מהפרספקטיבה של המוחלט, אי אפשר למצוא את הדרך, את התרגול וכולי, מהפרספקטיבה של המוחלט. אז בעצם כשאנחנו בוחנים את המציאות, את הדרך שבה הדברים מתקיימים, ואנחנו בוחנים האם אפשר למצוא אותה, אם אפשר למצוא אותה, רימפוצ'ה אומר שההשקפה שהוא בוחר בה, המסקנה שהוא בוחר בה, זה שאם נחפש את ההערה וכולי, אם נבחון אותה, אם ננתח אותה, לא נוכל למצוא אותה, ולכן היא לא המוחלט.
그 슝지 요르 딱 슝지 단데 차인데 녀마소 청주 수장 지마이 수이장의 수마이 랑추 용수 세바나 델라 산제 주스 어떤지 지지 요래 다 가르르스나 청주 생년디 공판티 현다지기 두 생년버터버나시 제지 요 말을라 청주 생년 미 현다지기 나고 잡제 아니 이게 냐데베서 근데 레요 말에 소소 랑주를 유베 녀몽 두순 박자다 제바 아니 파 녀벨도기 남세윤두 아니 청주디 랑이 도기 토빙그레스 어떤데 치지어라 될 때네 청주 랑그 토그레 셴뜨고 말세 대양 추야기 냥가요 가르르스나 셴기 담마때 아니 랑기 냠슬레는 토고레 상계 좀 된데 남유송돼야 되래 tumnam dikpa chui muchushi rewe dunge chagi misela niki toba shen la pominde chunyi demba tembes ta sanje ranyi ki chön namgi nelu tekonani digi nechu chitawa shindu mandu sima moto nangi is chungi damba tembe ane loma kran soge dujarara sose di tön nyamso lembe bone nyomu bata di pasata chewa ma trene ane ngiri togu gres chungi damba tembe trawar gyus otakeza dire ta dagi tambu ngeji 장주 수계 지만이 식 디기 식 찍을 때네 다 장주 생에다 랑도 토마도 신을 떼고 보면 돼 봐. 어딜이야 주시 아니야.
Now there's one particular scripture or one particular text that Rinpoche says he's not sure about this text, but this text, what it actually tells us is that the state of enlightenment is not given to us by someone else. Instead, it is taught to us by others, and then based on those teachings, we put into practice whatever we've learned, and then reach the enlightened state ourselves. So these words basically explain exactly that. It's not a gift that is given to us. It's not like something we receive from someone, and it can be easily misunderstood. Enlightenment can be easily misunderstood in that we think someone can actually give it to us, can give us, bring us to this enlightened state. It can be kind of conferred onto us. This misapprehension can easily arise, but it's actually the case that, of course, we need others in the sense that we need others to teach us, to give us instructions. We do depend on others to give us instructions. However, then once we receive the necessary instructions, then we just have to put into practice whatever we've been taught. We have to then practice it ourselves in order to become an enlightened Buddha. And this is why the Buddha himself has said in the sutras, he has said that the munis, the enlightened being, the Buddhas, they do not wash away our virtue with water. They don't use water to wash away our misapprehension, our non-virtue. And they do not remove our suffering, the suffering of wandering beings like ourselves, of beings in samsara with their own hands. They cannot remove their suffering. They're unable to transfer their realization, their understanding of suchness, of how phenomena really exist. They cannot transfer this onto others. Instead, they take sentient beings, they take us to freedom by teaching the truth of suchness. So it's very clear in these words. So saying the Buddhas do not wash away our non-virtue, do not take away our suffering with their hands, cannot transfer their realizations, but can only teach us suchness. So it shows clearly that enlightenment is not a gift that is just conferred onto us, it's just given to us, it's transferred to us, but rather it's something we do need to depend on others for in terms of being taught the path. But then we ourselves have to practice this. We ourselves have to go through the different levels and steps in order then to reach the enlightened state of Buddha.
If we have a question in English, Annette, please read it.
Go us.
רק רגע, just a
One
minute.
second, please wait.
Some more details.
So,
단데 땡디기 님부 예다마 단데 대화여베 토네 슈베 이나스 상계 좀 된데 상계네 샤구시주 셴아 시구 샤구시주 신우젤라 에네 사람나탈 치규나네 코로나데 상골이마 니네 동네 파베 담보 니네 군중 파베 담보 니네 고바 파베 담보 니네 람 파베 담보 마 송윤두 코로나데 상고기 에네 군슈고 디나야 싱인디기 미케소스 셰바케소스 리바케소스 로케소스 토바케소스 차르나 럭두와스 허야 미케소 셰바케소 리바케소 로케소 토바케소스 티카르스 상계 좀 된데 담바식 남샤도 만두스 모테 임베칼라 다 초람기 연대 계수 졸람기 연대 계수 통람기 연대 계수 공람기 연대 계수 다 자점에 디붕원도 체 토바케소스 때는 하남기스 알라라스 다 배 상계 좀 된데 초고 고수 다 군조 배디 군조나 자점에 디고 탐년 종소스 뭐 된데스네 라바 마르베스 된데 이사르스메도 어디까지 셴나 때네 게 구구요 랑기 천정이 찍고 통이 찍으면 어때 되네야 하고도 왔어.
with regard to, for instance, the Buddha himself. So the Buddha, the Buddha himself, after he attained enlightenment, well, 49 days after he attained enlightenment, the Buddha went to Varanasi. And as he went to Varanasi, well, he met his 5 ascetic disciples. I mean, who previously were his companions when he engaged in ascetic practices. And he then taught the Four Noble Truths. And as he taught the Four Noble Truths, it is said that one of the ascetic companions, his name was Ajnata Kaundinya, he explained, now I was born, the birth of a human took place. A mind has arisen. Knowledge has arisen. Awareness has arisen. And realization has arisen. So he exclaimed these 5, he kind of said, a human was born, a mind or consciousness has arisen, a consciousness, a knowledge has arisen, awareness has arisen, and realization has arisen. So he talked about these 5 aspects that have been generated, which really refers to the 5 paths, So, and once he'd said that, so these 5 paths have been developed, have been generated, and then in the end, the celestial beings are saying alala, alala. So this is like the expression of joy by the celestial beings, in that in dependence on the Buddha's teachings, the 5 paths have been generated, and liberation is attained. So this alala, alala, this expression of joy by the celestial beings is an expression of joy over the fact that in dependence on the 5 paths, liberation is attained. And those words, therefore, these words clearly indicate that it is in dependence on the teachings that are given that then a person practices, puts whatever was learned into practice, meditates, and then attains the different stages, the path and the different stages, in order to then attain liberation.
התרגול עצמו, את ההישג עצמו, הוא צריך לנבוע מבפנים, הוא תלוי בנו.
Is the second question?
ערבית אליכם בחזרה. השאלה הבאה היא באנגלית, מהנטע.
Rinpoche, this is a question from the English audience. In order to absorb the understanding of dependent arising completely, and eventually also on subtle levels, how can we train to hold this understanding?
Rinpoche khande di ngire ta di ngaso tenje gi tawa di yonso zokpa thoyala di tara chapsan di koa lemba la ngaso Rinpoche de khande chik jogo gres.
Ta tele ya nga samjur shubena Sangye Chumden Degi Maha Chu Sumba Kabla and Sangye Rani ki Rang to Sungumiduas, Duje Kamdan, Mebel Ten Sunguduas, Yintu Deni, Chatamawak, any Tawal Denye, and Dodebe Tawa Denye, Semzambe Tawa Denye, Ranju Tawa Denye, and Tanju Tawa Denye, that Kanda Yonsu Tawa Tunda Shirba, or Tunda Shigi, and G Kap Tidulea. Ji susu kamda mebala tene sangye chumden degi tundashi namjata dene maji sundaya ji yungudu was ti indu ta pena nindu dingi kabla kansa da meba mato chugi da meba singingi tanye di sungumidu was no ta tene sem zamba yinche gi tene ya chugi da meba ji sungudu was yin ta chugi da meba di sungbe kabla yinna ya Dr. Zane, the she semne, Nigu Yebe looks to Chene, Semzambe Kakidame, Ranju Kakidame, Dr. Zane, and Nigu Yebe looks to Chene, Sunguduas. The Tanju Kablaya, the she semne, Dr. Zane, Junseja, near to Mepa, and Tana Shizacha Deva, or Tindechigi, Niluchi, and Dana Bene, Minkatayo Zangi, and Joksuchi Sunguduas. Ta Tartung Shube and Tombaniki, Tenjung Tawachi, Guguyana, Tande Tanju Tawata, Jesu Javachi, Gugurete, Inaya, and Samsam Betawa the Denny Yamsulene, Lamji Topakin, Yunguyore, Chirama Betawata, Dode Betawa Latene, Koratene, Rangi, Tene Shunishebe, but Tenejig, Lamji, relation to Korapauchi, Drachi, Yunguyore, Rangi Shunisheba, the Pauchi, Drachi, Yungor, T into Lamsa, Tombani Tawas, and Chichiranchilia, and Tanju Betawa Timato, and Shenda to get Comna Choyomar Salo, or Tip the Pechi in Samarin, not in the Sangu. Tomar and Laverimbe on the Chene, Tandadi, Junjugunan, Sumbekanana. Comment logic, Oma Siki nurse, Sumbanashi, and Tibo Omagi, and Tawati, and social Lobjon Chen, Tea, Todding Eve Gane, and comment Tawati, Nurji Suyundu, and or Tawa Kumalia and Washington, Yahanji, or Machine Brodea, what in the inside, in the into Solam Chung Sand, Solam Ding Sand, what in the Kalia. In G. Lamla Shubal, never change the Injiminji, Tangu with the Tawa Tumai, but in the G. Man and yet I made up in the Isamare.
שהבודה לימד את השקפת הריקות, הוא לא לימד את מה שהוא רצה, זה אומר כאילו רק בזכות עצמו, אלא...
Now, with regard to his Rinpoche's personal view, so Rinpoche says, well, the Buddha didn't just teach, well, we say that the Buddha, well, he taught the Dharma, and we say the Buddha taught from his own accord, but he didn't just teach whatever he wanted. He taught in accordance with the needs, the predisposition, the interests, and so forth of his disciples. So if the students were, for instance, follower of the Hira philosophy, so taking the philosophy of the Vaibhashika and the Satantrika, the Chittamatra and the Madhyamika, with the Madhyamika being subdivided into Svatantrika and Prasangika. Now, with regard to these different philosophical tenet systems, well, the Buddha taught according to the needs of his disciples. So he taught the Vaibhashika view to a person who was ready to receive the Vaibhashika teachings. He taught the Satantrika view to a person who was ready to receive the Satantrika teachings, and so forth. So all these different philosophical views that the Buddha set forth, he taught those in accordance with what his disciple needed at that very moment. And so in that way, these different philosophical systems developed. They came into existence because the Buddha taught in such different ways. For instance, when we look at these four philosophical systems, for instance, in the Vaibhashika and the Satantrika system, those two philosophical schools, it mentions the lack of a certain self. It talks of selflessness, but it does not talk of, well, selflessness of phenomenon, of person, but it does not talk of selflessness of phenomena. It only speaks of the selflessness of a certain state of existence in terms of person, but not with regard to phenomena. However, in the Chittamatra school, which is the next philosophical school, the third of those four, in that school, there's not just mentioning, or there's not just the exposition or the teaching on, you find in those texts, you don't just find a teaching on the selflessness of person, but also the selflessness of phenomena other than person. However, according to the Chittamatra school, all phenomena exist independent of being merely labeled. Then the same is said in the Madhyamika Svatantrika, so the Madhyamika being the fourth of the four schools, of the four philosophical systems, being subdivided to Svatantrika and Prasangika. In the Svatantrika school, they also say phenomena exist beyond being merely labeled. And it's only the Prasangika that present the final view, that present the way in which phenomena really exist, which is that they lack inherent existence, that they do not exist beyond being merely labeled. So you see that different things are taught. In the first two philosophical schools, only selflessness of person is taught. In the next, in the mind-only school, and in the Madhyamika Svatantrika school, phenomena are taught to be inherently existent, and only the Prasangika school teaches the highest view. So we may think, well, wouldn't it be better to teach the highest view right from the beginning? Well, the goal is, of course, eventually to teach all disciples the final view, because this is, well, what is required in order to be enlightened. But in the meantime, it is helpful in the meantime to receive teachings on the other philosophical systems, and to develop on the basis of those. So to practice on the basis of those, gain realizations, gain understandings based on the Vaibhashika and Satantrika school, gain understanding, gain realizations on the basis of the Chittamatra school, in order then eventually reach a level when the mind is ready, when the mind is ripe enough, reach then the level, the highest level of the Prasangika school. And this is what also Shantideva expresses in his Bodhichayatara, or the Bodhisattva ways of life. In the 5th chapter, verse 83, he says, he basically says that that with regard to generosity and so forth, it is through going higher and higher. So to go through the higher and higher states, that through kind of proceeding through the higher and higher states and eliminating the lower states. Oh, sorry, this is not the right verse, actually. No, I was mistaken. But anyway, I remember Rinpoche's words. So Rinpoche says, by negating earlier views and going higher and higher, proceeding higher and higher, in that way we reach the highest state. So in other words, eliminating that is leaving behind certain lower views. First we understand the lower views of some of the philosophical schools, and then we leave them behind. We gain some understanding, our mind becomes more mature, and then we leave them behind in order then to proceed in terms of the different practices, proceed higher up to the higher states. Sorry, I'm just going to give you the other verse. Is time up, Rinpoche asked?
Yes, Rinpoche. Thank you, Rinpoche, for addressing the questions. We've come to the end of the time of our session, so we apologize to the Russian audience. Misha, you'll be the first to ask a question on behalf of the Russian audiences tomorrow. And so we've come to the end of the first day of the teaching on the Sutra on Dependent Arising. Thank you so much, Rinpoche, for your wonderful teachings. And thanks to our interpreters, Geshe Kesa Wangmo, Venerable Carlson, and Chechen Mongush. We will conclude today's session with a dedication. Venerable Carlson, please.
In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. May the Buddha Dharma flourish and its upholders have long life. May all sentient beings arise into happiness and their temporal and ultimate goals be fulfilled. Through the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of the Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the precious body mind, not yet born and rise and grow, may that bond have no decline but increase forevermore.
Again, Rinpoche, we'll meet tomorrow, 10:30 Israel and Moscow time, and 2 p.m. Mongolia, Singapore time. See you all tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Okay.